Welcome to the Coach Speak podcast, built for coaches, by coaches, hosted by Jamie Bolton and Dustin Martin, sponsored by Ray Crowther, providing athletic training equipment since 1932, helping you dominate with fundamentals.
Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Speak. Today, this episode is presented by one of our sponsors, Pro Quick Draw. They are a playbook software that help you save a lot of time through different things such as their playbook templates. And we're excited to talk a little bit more about that in today with our topic. So Bolton, let us know what we're getting into today.
Yeah, today we're talking about spring football practice. We're in the off-season right now, so we're getting geared up for, off-season development. We'll talk about the goals of spring football. We'll talk about how to structure that to maximize time. We'll talk about how to identify leaders and playmakers. And then at the end, we'll go through some things and challenges that we face as coaches and what directions we need to take. So segment one, we're really going to get into it right now and talk about the goals of spring football. So it's an exciting time really for all of our off-season work. We're working through January, we're working through February and March, and then we get into April. And as far as high school guys, we get about 20 days or so in North Carolina and South Carolina, maybe a little bit longer. And we'll talk about some differences in that. We've both coached in both North and South Carolina. We both had padded and full contact practices. We've also had non-padded, so we're going to get into that and how that looks. So let's go ahead and get started. So what specific goals do you look for when spring practice starts?
So, this is a really fun time of year, and it comes a lot quicker than you think it does. January and February, like you were saying, it is just straight getting after it in the weight room. Just the team bonding and the sweat and the hard work and even the toughness that we talked about a little while ago. When it comes to spring practice, I think it can be very valuable, but I think if you don't do it the right way, it also can be invaluable. And the main goal that I think, in high school that you use spring for is let's kind of get an idea of what our team looks like this year. Maybe it's a year where we have a lot of returners and we need one or two pieces we have to figure out. But then maybe it's a year where you have a lot of young guys that you're counting on to see who can handle that pressure. So I would say the number one goal that I'm looking for when we hit in spring practice is let's evaluate our personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not get lost in the playbook. Let's truly put them through 10 to 15 days of just see what they can handle. Let's see what their skill ability is. And let's see what we have going into the summer to see where we're at.
Yeah, for sure. I think the number one thing for me too is let's evaluate our talent. I'm in a position now where I'm going into year 3 at this current school, and you're actually starting at year 0 for you. So this is your first off season. It's a very pivotal moment for both of us. One, I have an idea of some of the guys that we have returning. They've had big off seasons, hopefully, and they're going to be better. But there's always surprises. There's always surprises from underclassmen. There's always surprises for maybe guys that come into your program that are new. But yeah, the very first thing we want to identify personnel as soon as we can. And that's difficult because, you may not have a padded practice. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but, it's hard to know if, an offensive lineman is really going to be able to get it done, or a tight end or somebody that's got a block if you really can't have those types of practices. Mm-hmm. But what you need to really emphasize then, in my opinion, is who can make plays. Looking at an offense perspective, who can make plays for a team, who can score touchdowns. That's one of the number one things that goes through my mind. Who can score touchdowns, because those guys have to play offense. And then, I'm not the head coach, so I don't dictate personnel. But if, when I was a head coach or when I did have that say so, what I really thought about was who's the quarterback. I mean, that's a given in any level. 2, who's the running back? Okay, you got to have a good running back, in my opinion. I don't think you can go into it and just say, hey, we're going to do like running back. Yep, if you got one, he's got to play running back. He's got to be on the field all the time. And then you try to get at least 2 receivers that can score touchdowns, not just good athletes, but the guys that can absolutely score, because not everybody, you might have some great athletes, but not everybody can score.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And I think we'll kind of switch what I think from the defensive side. The number one thing, like you said, is we have to evaluate what are we allowed to do in spring practice, because it is different by state, but also association. Are you public? Are you private? And also the timing of it. Some people, I remember in South Carolina, a big struggle was you had all your spring sport athletes who were still competing in the playoffs and championships and and you didn't have all your people, you know, and then most recently in the independent world in North Carolina, you can't start spring until all the championships are over. So it's kind of almost like a prelude to the summer. It's not even a spring practice
It's like an
anymore.
extension. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I think from the defensive side, knowing that spring practice is probably not going to be full tilt live to go, because that's not the main goal we're looking for anyways. But I think the biggest thing defensively is, what are the most common areas of weakness in a defense? Like when offenses turn that film on, like going back to my offensive days, the first thing you look at is, are they disciplined? Are they running upfield? Are they pursuing to the ball as the backside corner, taking the correct angle? And then the second thing is, do they pursue to the football? Like that's the number two thing. So for me, we are going to, number one, we're going to look and emphasize the discipline part of it. Understand our base assignment. Like that's what I care about getting into in the spring. Can we leave the spring and know exactly what our base defense is? Can we align correctly? Do we know the assignment? Are we executing that? And then second, we're going to emphasize getting to the football, because contact, no contact, that's a big part of defense, getting to the football. And that's kind of what I'll look at first.
Yeah, same thing on offense. You think about, okay, like how do you do running game if you're only going to be in shells, or if you're not in shells, maybe you're just in, T-shirts. I think the same thing is there. You're looking for a fit. You're looking for proper leverage at fitment. You're looking for, timing in the backfield. You're looking for mesh. You can work all your reads in the zone read game. You can work your play action game. And you may not know who the playmakers are, but oftentimes, how many were you choosing from here? We're talking about offensive linemen. You got 20? No, you probably got about 6 guys, and they got to get it done. So either way, you're looking for, like you're talking about, can you get your base stuff in? Who can be your playmakers? And then trying to figure that out. So if you're going to be a 4 open team, 10 personnel, then where does who's going to be your slot? Who's going to be your outside guys? How do they fit your system? That's what I always tend to look at. And that's usually through, drills and through some installs, but you can kind of see if your X receiver, the guy that's going to be your vertical threat, he's got to try to go and compete a little bit in practice to see if he can really take the top off and make some plays that you need. That's just an example. If it's the slot guy for us, we need him to be a really great route runner, and he's probably got to be our best overall guy. And sometimes that's hard without padded practice, but you got to do the best you can. And then we kind of transition to, the installs, and that kind of helps the evaluation too, to see who can pick up what and that kind of thing. Talk us a little bit about how much of the playbook do you really get into? You could talk about like, okay, we want to get like 50%, or we want to get our base stuff or get our identity down. Talk about that a little bit about defense.
Yeah, I think, the number one thing that we kind of do, and we communicate this as a staff, but also with the players, is the first thing that I'll talk about before we get into the playbook part is we need to identify what we're looking for in each position. Like what is they have to be able to do this at minimum to play that position. And we kind of categorize that between defensive linemen, linebackers, and DBs. And, you have some safety positions, which is kind of a good mixture of linebacker and DB, but we'll categorize them as a DB. But the one thing I'm looking for a defensive lineman, can you dominate the line of scrimmage? That's what I need to know. And this is something that we talked about, it's kind of hard if you can't go full tilt or go live, because you're not getting a live look of, can they really dominate it? But do they have the proper get off? Do they have the hand placement? Are they executing the things against bags or standing linemen that we can see? They got to be able to maintain gap integrity. Linebackers, I need to see that they can lead the defense. That's what I want to see. They know it inside and out. They understand the run fit structure, but also the cover structure behind it. And then DBs, first thing I want to know, can you cover? That's the number one thing you have to do at DB, cover. Then you go tackle. So are you able to play coverage, but then also tackle in space? Getting into the playbook stuff, I've done it a lot of different ways. I've tried to pile a bunch in an install, and I've dialed it back where a middle school team probably could run the install that we run. And what I've learned is we're going to get to what the players can process. That's the number one thing. I stopped planning an 8-day install or a 10-day install because you're going to reevaluate it after day one. Where are we after that first practice? Typically, moving into year 7 of defense, I've got it down pretty good on how we need to scale it. But I would say we're only going to probably get through about 35 to 45% of our defensive package in the spring.
That's a good bit. That's a good bit. I mean, you want to have enough to probably go into a 7-on-7. You want to have enough and have some answers there and have some adjustments. And also, you want to have enough to probably evaluate what your players do best. Are you a zone team? Are you can you play match? Can you play man? You know, and you probably have to have enough variance, and I'm sure in your defensive scheme.
100%. And so I think you have, when you go into spring, you have your base coverage you want, and then you have what we call in the R4 world the read coverage. What is your adjustment? So the way I like to think about it is we're going to have our 1 or 2 base coverages, but then we're going to have our coverage adjustments that go off of those coverages. Where are we weak in our base coverages, and where can we react a little different in another coverage to protect that? So to your point, I think that, and this is another great thing for a spring ball blueprint, is you're probably going to go to some 7-on-7s in the summer, whether you host or go to another school. Some people like to do a tournament. This needs to be a great prequel to the summer 7-on-7 stuff, especially for the back end guys. But, you know, to your point, you got to have enough in to evaluate. You know, I don't think you can go in and just run zone from a defensive standpoint. You can't just go in and run a zone coverage or a man coverage. Like, you got to have a mixture, because like you said, we need to see what we can do, and you can add a little bit from the offensive side. I don't think you can go in and just run 2 concepts and 1 run scheme, you know?
Yeah, there's certainly a balance. I think you want to be able to establish your base, you know, systems. And I think, you know, I always think about, am I going to run a bunch of tags in the spring, or and it just depends, right? Like this year's year 3, we got a quarterback that's coming back as last year's starter. So that helps. You know, 2 years ago, we had 1 quarterback at spring football. He goes all the way through. Then we have 2 transfers come in, and now we have an issue, you know, and at the end of the middle and the end of summer. So it's like, well, we just installed a lot of offense, but now we almost have to start over to try to evaluate these kids. And one of the kids that came in actually ended up starting for us. So it could just vary year to year. But I think you definitely have to say, okay, this is the 50% of my total menu, maybe 40% of my total menu that I can take in that any quarterback can execute, any running back, any offensive line can execute, or at least try to execute. Like you really don't want to get too far. But then the other thing is, if you do go to 7-on-7s and you want to have some confidence, then you probably do need to add some things that are answers to your base stuff. Yes. And so that's always a hard thing to kind of manage. This year, what we're going to do, since we do have a returning quarterback, we have 1 returning receiver, you know, so that's called a touchdown. And we have a returning running back and like 2 returns. So we're going to be young again, but we do have some guys that have played, you know, on Fridays. But, you know, it's just going to be kind of back to the drawing board each year. Each year is different. Each year is a new, you know, kind of cohesion with the guys. And so I think it's just going to be interesting to see. It's really exciting. It's very exciting for me to go through this process again, because every year it's a new team. It's a different, even if you have some similar guys, it's so new. But yeah, this year we're definitely going to put our base stuff in. Probably going to put about 6 to 8 concepts in, depending on how they go. We usually do a 10-day install and then repeat. Sometimes it's 8 and we repeat, but usually it's like the first 4 days are the same, and then the next 4 days it's the same, but you're adding, and then and then that 8 to 12 is a little bit, you know, similar, but you're kind of maybe adding a shift or a motion, depending on where they're at. So it's definitely, you don't want to just say, hey, we got 12 days and then try to go through a 12-day install. I think it's important to go like 4, 4, and 4, and that way if they don't really get it, then you can always come back. So, but yeah, I think that's how we're probably going to attack installs this spring.
And I think that, you know, the biggest thing is, the best coaches I've ever heard speak always say you have to adapt your scheme to your personnel. And spring is the best time to get ahead of what personnel do we have. Because, you know, for you're coming back year 3. So some of the kids, you were there as they were sophomores. So you have some seniors that are coming up. And then me, I'm going into year 0. So all I have is I'm leaning on other coaches about abilities. I'm evaluating with my eyes, but watching some film from last year. And we all know kids 365 days ago can change like that. Like there have been kids that have been in programs where as a 9th or 10th grader, you're like, I just don't know. And then they are key contributors on junior and senior year. So a big thing I think is being able to evaluate them, but then also take your base install. Like you said, no matter what, we would run this whoever's in the game. Right. It doesn't matter the personnel. You know, you may have a running quarterback from year to year, but like we're not going to overly install quarterback runs because we don't know if he's going to be the guy or not.
Right. And here's to that point, last year we had a pocket guy and we had more of a dynamic runner, and they were both competing for the job. It was like, we don't have a starter. And so that whole spring, we were doing a lot of, triple option out of the gun, like not necessarily veer, but it's, a lot of RPO stuff, like on the run and the flats. We did a lot of, inside zone triple, and I don't know. I was trying to cater the offense to personnel. Well, we go all the way through summer. We spend a lot of time on this, and this is a part of our menu, but you want to try to gear your menu towards your personnel. So like the quarterback, we had, so it's difficult for the pocket passer to execute some of that stuff. But, we go through the summer and we get all the way through all of our scrimmages, and both kids are playing well. We end up starting the running type kid, and didn't end up working out, but we ended up playing the next guy, and he had a really good year, the pocket guy. But that's just an example of, you don't need to like full sell, like we're going all in on, being a quarterback run driven team, because he may get injured. So you do have to have a menu. And I know we're going to be talking this and the next couple episodes about how to structure that menu. But yeah, it starts with personnel. Your personnel will dictate your formation. So offensively, you got to have a couple questions. What kind of offensive line do we have? Are they small and fast? Hopefully they're not small and weak, because you're not probably going to be very good.
No doubt.
But if you're big and not very fast, obviously small and fast, you're thinking more zone. Maybe it's option based. But if you're big and you can kind of move people, maybe you're more zone based. And then you go to like running back and then receivers, and then obviously the quarterback situation is huge. Like, what kind of quarterback do you have? So those are all the kinds of questions you have to have. And then, do you have a tight end, or do you have two tight ends? And so if you have a tight end, you feel like you're capable of using him in your offense, then you definitely have to, your personnel will dictate your formations. The formations, are you 10, 11, 12, whatever the case may be. And then your formations dictate the plays that you run out of them. So it's always players, right? Formations, and then the plays that come after. So I think you try to take the spring as much as you can to try to figure out those three questions.
Yeah, no, man, that's really good stuff. All great teams and all teams that have won a championship had great personnel. There's
absolutely,
good coaching can only take you so far, because, we're not out there making the plays. It's the kids making the plays.
Yeah.
Good coaching can guide that. But at the end of the day, personnel wins football games. And I think you use spring as a true evaluation of personnel. What do we really have? We have an idea of what we have, but there are kids that have played JV that we don't know what they're able to do. So one, evaluate. Two, I think you can experiment a little bit, okay? From the defensive standpoint, you're looking at personnel. What kind of DBs do we have at corner? Are they super athletic? Can they handle being on an island playing man coverage? Or, are they not the most athletic corners? Do we have to do some things where they have some help? So I think that's a big deal. And the better your offense is, that on the team you're coaching, the quicker you're going to be able to find out what your personnel on defense is. Because if you have a lot of guys that can stretch the field vertical, we're going to find out, do we have guys who can cover the field vertically? Do we have to play with more cushion or more collision? And I think that's a really big thing that we look for on the defensive side. But, what you just said was, what personnel do you have? And I feel like in high school, from an offensive standpoint, sometimes you have a luxury of having different personnel. Maybe you do have a true one-back family. Then you have the ability to bring one or two tight ends in to change it. But defensively, you kind of have what you have. You may be able to go from a 4-2-5 to a 4-3, but most of the time you don't. So that's one thing too.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of tie all this in, personnel dictates a lot. You're not going to get it right all the time. In the spring, I've missed, hey, this guy's going to be a dude, and bullets start flying, and it ain't the case. And I think the opposite's also true. You're going to have some surprises when, oh man, you start putting the pads on in the fall, you start going through some scrimmages. I mean, this guy's really, so don't, you don't want to take everything and put it all in on spring, but it's got to be a tool. And I think spring practice coming up is exciting. You get to see that going on. And then, the last two things about the goals of spring football is, team chemistry and culture building. I think, we talked about that in the previous couple episodes. I think this is a great way to establish your team culture. I think it's the number one way you can do it. We talked with other coaches about, how do you establish that culture? We talked about the weight room. We talked about strength conditioning being a piece to that. And maybe the biggest piece of that, we all suffer together, that means that we're all going in one direction. And so it's a great opportunity to get in front of your team. And maybe this is the first time that you can get everybody in the same room, whether you're doing installs or you're talking about, your core values, you're talking about what you want the team to look like. And so this is oftentimes the first time that you can really start to implement, your core values, your mission, your vision for the program. And so how did you kind of approach that when you were the head coach?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I firmly believe in is supporting multi-sport athletes. I want them to understand, like, when we're in football season, I expect football to be your number one priority from a sports standpoint. But if you're a wrestler or a basketball player, that's your number one priority from a sports standpoint in the winter. If you play baseball, soccer, you play golf, lacrosse, I want you to focus on that in the spring. So we do offer some things in the winter and spring for those who don't play another sport to try to, the football one-on-one sessions. But to your point, when we hit spring practice, we're at a point where all other sports are over, other than non-educational based sports, travel ball, AAU, stuff like that. But I think you take spring practice is, like you said, it is the beginning of football season. And even though it's only April or May, like, it's time. Like, we're back together as a team. But that is the exciting part. So I think if you are all business starting as soon as spring practice all the way until football, they're going to get wore out. They're going to get burnt out. So I think you find a way to install who you are, where your brand is, what you're going to be. I think you have your captains in place, so they already are handling your guys. But I think the number one thing that we think, or that I personally think, spring practice, we're going to evaluate our personnel. We're going to install our base games, and we're going to make it really, really fun. That's what my goal was when we hit spring practice. We're going to try to get in, get out, and then we're going to have some kind of team building or fun thing at the end of each spring practice. Yes. Like, we did things such as simple things. We did an egg toss one day, and the kids, they loved it. Little things go a long way with high school athletes. And I think the biggest thing is, if you make it fun, then it's only going to increase the commitment that's going to carry over into the summer. So I think that's a big part of spring.
Yeah, and also too, not only with your team, but with the families. I remember we did the spring. I think we did a spring after spring practice was over. That whole session was over. We would do a big cookout, and that's one way to get the parents in. It could be a fundraiser if you want to do it like that. But you're kind of like ending the spring, and then you're trying to kick off the summer. You're trying to push for summer attendance. You're like, okay, parents, get your kids here. This is the time that we're going to do it. This is important. It's really a good selling point for your program. And then you can also talk about your core values. Anytime that you can meet with parents to talk about your core values is huge, in my opinion, because now you're saying it to the kid, you're saying it to the parent, and then they're like, okay, well, any decisions that are going to be made in this program are based around these core values, and therefore they kind of know where you're coming from. So I love that. I love that we did that. And then we did one at the end of the summer too, to kick off the fall. And so that was really fun. But
and I think to your point, like, and this is for spring ball, but I think you can carry it throughout the year, is you kind of need a seasonal meeting with parents and the football family per se. You need to have meetings with the entire football family, the parents, the players, because what it does, to your point, is it closes out one season and leads you into another. So, having one after winter workouts going into the spring, having one, and it doesn't always have to be in person. It doesn't always have to be a cookout.
I think we did a winter Zoom. We did like a winter Zoom or something before spring, just to kind of set it up. Yeah.
But one thing I would like to do, since we're on this topic, is I would love to, like, at a big time school that supports, do an end of year school bash where you kind of have that spring game setting. You invite everybody out, and you have like some food trucks, and it's kind of let's close the door on the school year, on the spring, and then let's kind of move into the summer. That's an idea I want to do.
I like that. Yeah, I think we talked, a lot about skill development. I mean, well, we really need to talk a little bit about that, actually. So we talked about player evaluation, talked about how we would install. We talked about, team chemistry and culture building and using strength and conditioning. A lot of times this is the first time that you can get all your kids, if they're not lifting in school, to lift after school before practice. So that's something else that can be established before you go into your summer, which I think is huge. So if you have 4 weeks in the spring to kind of set a base, if you don't lift, you should. I mean, I think all kids should be lifting, right after the season. Obviously, in a way that benefits the kid, but that should be a year-round, protocol for strength conditioning. But if you don't have it, if you're at a place that you don't have, or you have a lot of sport athletes that aren't going to have, if you have a baseball kid, that he's not going to be lifting 5 days a week like your only football kids would. So this is the first time you get your hands on them in the strength conditioning, you get them in shape, all that. And then skill development, I think those are big to be able to develop the skills. I really like teaching the drills in spring practice. So if you're going to be doing circle chase, if you're going to do buddy tackle, if you're going to do, whatever the case may be, taking time to teach those drills. That way, when you get into summer and fall, man, you can do those drills like that. And I think that's a really
that may
big
be
piece.
the best thing that you ever say throughout our entire podcast career, because there's nothing worse than getting to the summer when you're like short on time, like you only have 50 minutes to get what you need to get done, and you take 10 on having to reteach a drill.
Yeah.
The young me learned that. So I think that's a great piece of advice.
Teach perfect drill, teach pat and go, teach the little things. Don't worry about all the reps that you're going to get. The reps will come in the summer, but you really need to make sure your
turnover circuit.
You need to make sure that those reps mean something. Like, you don't want to just have. I love coaching on the fly, but I think I like to take time, and you demonstrate it. You get your older players to demonstrate it, and you make sure it's perfect. And you got to make sure. I just telling myself this, like, that's what I love about spring ball. You get to really just break everything back down. And just talking about that skill development and how we practice. Let's go right into our next segment. We're going to be talking about spring practice structure. And so what the best methods or methodology going into spring practice, how that should look. Should it be, what's the duration? How many times per week? How do we maximize time? Is it contact? When do we do contact? If you can do contact, when is best for non-contact? And then and we'll kind of get into that, because those are really interesting things from different perspectives. So how do you like doing spring practice? If you are, let's put this scenario, if you're in South Carolina where we were, how did you like spring practice, and how would you kind of structure that?
Yeah, so I think you have to look at the total amount of days, the total amount of time you can do. But I think what has worked really well at places that I've been is going 3 or 4 days a week. Don't go Monday through Friday. Like, let's go Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, or maybe we go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday if you're a 3-day-a-week team. So, but, I can speak for where we're at this year. I know we're going to go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and do that 3 weeks in a row. And, I think it's really good because it kind of breaks into that install like you were talking about earlier, because most of the time I do have a 4-day install. We have to adapt it and move some things around, but it really allows us to cover the 1 through day 3, and then day 4, let's look at all of it together. Yeah. And then that allows how the next week goes. So I would say from that, I think 12 practices is a great number, because remember, we got to go back to the goal of spring practice. And I think that having a good enough amount to where you can actually evaluate what they're doing and understand that, we're not necessarily at spring practice to see who can annihilate someone, who can make the right drop, who can read the number 2 receiver, who can box or spill depending on our scheme. But I think that the duration needs to be quick. It doesn't need to be more than about an hour and a half. It's kind of what I think.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to get. I'm always err on the side of more is best, unfortunately, and I don't know if that's always the best thing. I always like maybe 16 if we could get a 16 in. I think 18 is a bit much. I'm fine with, I think 12 for me. I would like to build in some days where, and it depends too. This is another one. Like, do you get 12 days for offense and defense? Or are you having to 2-platoon? Like, are you 2-platoon, or do you have to split guys? So now you're cutting into some installs now. So like, I think last year we did offensive day, then defensive day, offensive day, then defensive day. Then you only get two 2 days on offense a week if you go 4 days a week.
Yeah, and I think
that's hard to scaffold. That's hard to scaffold.
Another great, question. Are you a team where you have few that play both ways, or are you a team where everyone's got to go through both sides of the ball? And I think that dictates
personnel,
a lot too.
and personnel drives that. Again, I think understanding your personnel, and it may be the case where if you're new to a program and you don't have much background, it's good to have both days, because now you could say, well, that guy really is probably better suited for offense, or this guy's got to be a two-way guy. He's a dude, because we just don't have anybody else. And I'll say this: I heard it from somebody, I cannot remember who it was, but I have an 80% rule on that. So tell me what you think about this. So I have, all right, when do you two? Oh, I think it was Joe Salas. Okay, there you go. When do you two-platoon? Because when we were at the school we were at when we coached together, we were at a 2A school, or maybe a 1A at that point. Well, yeah, most teams were going both ways. You got, like probably 8 good players, and they're both going both ways. And we actually had several guys at Kings Mountain go both ways this past year. But the question that I always used, even when I was at Cannon, because that's a smaller school, you don't have as many players, is when do you go? Because the question was, Coach, why doesn't your best receiver play DB? Well, I always said this: if you could have a starter, right, at let's say slot receiver, but he can start at corner and be really, really good, when does he not become a two-way starter? It's when his backup is 80% as good at him at that secondary position. Yep. So if you're starting Y, right, is a starter at corner, when do you not play him on defense? Is when his guy, the backup, it can be quote unquote 80% as good. And obviously there's subjectivity to that. Sure. But you have to make that determination, because now for me, I get my wide receiver at 100% capacity. Yep. He plays half the snaps. He's probably going to be way more productive. And I could play a corner, 100% of the time. And then what the big benefit is, they both get exponentially better because they don't have to split time. And if you use that model and you have enough kids that are quote unquote 80% as good, then you can split practice, you double your reps. And now you have a system to where, one, you have kids getting better with specificity, right, with their position, and then two, how much more an advantage do you have against teams that go both ways? Sure. So
and that's not saying you can't use them situationally.
100%. We did that a lot.
Yep. And that's good. I would have to think about, do you have any ideas on how you evaluate that 70%? Is it, for example, because when you say 80%, the first thing I think about is, okay, are we going to measure covering a guy 80% of the time? Or are we going to, you know what I'm saying? So
if it's at corner, I think that's the big, I mean, is he going to give up bombs?
Yeah.
Number one thing. It doesn't matter. I think you got to look out there and say, can he get the job done most of the time? And then, like you said, you got to be able to use spot. You got to be able to put your guys on the field when they need to be on the field. So we had a really good running back at Cannon, and 2,000-yard rusher, caught 500, a bunch of balls, like second receiver on the team. Well, his tail was on defensive end on third downs because he can get after the quarterback. Now, a couple of reasons. We didn't have to put in a huge package for him to learn the defense. It's like, dude, it's 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 15. Like, go get the quarterback. Same thing with our Y. And you coach this kid too, Deuce. He'd play Y, but man, when we go in and it's 3rd and long, or there's a definite passing situation, I put him in a man coverage situation because he's a good man player. And
I use him too.
I think you got to be smart about it. I don't think you can be like, I'm only two-platoon all the time. I think you have to use both, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, you don't want to get caught with your best players on the sideline when the game's on the line. And if you get beat, you get beat. Actually, the Metrolina game that we mentioned, our best wide receiver, our Y, he wasn't a starter, but he was in the game on the Hail Mary that we got beat on. So you know what? It is what it is. Like, our best player got beat over the top. I can live with it. We had the best players out there. So, and they dual train. It's not like we just throw them in there. Like we have
for sure
periods in practice. Yeah.
But I mean, the first thing that I think about when you say that, though, is it does provide the opportunity. All right. For example, you have player A, who is a great athlete, who is a primary offensive guy. You have player B, who is a defensive guy. Player A is better than him on defense, but by allowing player B to truly get the reps and all the focus during practice because you're splitting practice, offense and defense same time. It allows him to get better because now he's not second group or third group behind that kid. So I like it from that standpoint. I really would like to get in a deep dive one day on what's the best way we can determine that 80%.
Yeah, that's such a subjective term.
Sure.
I know that sometimes are like, how do you evaluate 80%? Well, I think it's got to be a gut thing. I mean, I think you can. Well, the good thing is you can put them against each other. Typically, there's the same type of player. All right, so if you have a tight end and a defensive end, like is one just getting totally dominated, and then you can kind of flip them. But yeah, I mean, I think you just got to be smart with it. I think you got to be smart with your personnel.
And I think if you have a kid, so if you're going to get 5 fade routes ran on you at corner, and you're guaranteed to stop 3, the 4th rep is iffy, and the 5th you don't cover. I think that qualifies to, what?
Yeah.
Him fully, not gassed from being on offense for a 10-play drive is probably going to be better than the kid who's better at 70% because he's tired. So I think there's that's really cool to think
and that's
about.
probably true for most, mid to small schools. Obviously, if you have a big school, you'll have guys that have been specializing all the way from JV on up.
Yes.
We didn't really have that many crossover guys at York. And they kind of already established themselves in positions at the lower levels. This is, for your mid-sized, smaller schools, maybe a kid comes in, that kind of thing.
But I think this is great for the blueprint and how you structure your practice because the amount of days you go, if you, like you said, are going offense, defensive day, you need more days because if not, you are missing out on the teams who are going offense and defense the same day.
Yeah, if you go 16 days and you get 8 on each side of the ball, you're also going to do some 7-on-7 competition, when you can, and that kind of thing.
Like, this all falls into personnel because playing both ways or not, but then that kind of determines how much scheme you can run, not even 100%. Personnel based. Like, okay, they have to learn the entire offense and defense. So, we got to make sure we keep it simple enough where they can retain both sides versus only learning the offense.
100%. That definitely goes into the blueprint. And I think that's a part of evaluating your personnel. And that will definitely not only change your practice structure in the spring, but also in the fall too. The idea is to use spring and summer to make sure that your fall is as clean and scripted and like you kind of have an idea. Now it'll all change, but but you want to be in the best position possible. And just talking a little bit about practices, if you are going to do like a split, like a offense day and defensive day, how does that look for like a defensive day? How would you, like if I'm the offense coordinator and you're the defense coordinator, how would it look? And let's take JV too, right? I like this model a lot. Take JV into consideration. How do you structure your defensive day? Talk to me just a little bit about how you would do that.
So, yeah, and I think this is a great time to kind of talk about that just because of the new school that I'm going to. I sat down the other day with the head coach I'm working for, and I said, hey, I've been at schools where we've two-platoon and, had to go both sides. I've been at both, big, small. I said, can you kind of run me through practice structure? And the way they do it, I really like. And the first thing he said is, so we two-platoon. So we're going to have offensive coaches, defensive coaches, primary offense, primary defense. So if we start practice out and we are primary varsity defense, all JV players will go to offense, every single JV player. And all the offensive coaches coach the JV players aside from the coordinator. The offensive coordinator for varsity will take all remaining varsity offensive guys and go work and do some things with them. So I'll program, let's say that our practice is at even 20 periods. I will just say, hey, period 7 and 8, we're going to go 7-on-7. I need a scout team. The guy who has the leftover varsity offensive players, he sends you the guys period 7 and 8, and they're the scout team for you. So you're not going against the JV. You're seeing equal talent. And, it brought me back to the York days because I remember in my first or second year at York, Bobby said, hey, we're going to take the 9th grade and the 10th grade or 9th grade and JV staff and make one mega staff. We had 10 coaches, it was amazing. We had 5 offensive guys, 5 defensive guys. And the way we did it there was 9th grade offense, JV defense.
Exactly.
And then
Yep.
we went against each other and flipped it. But I think if you don't have the luxury to have a completely separate JV staff, you have to get creative. And listening to, him and the way they do it, I was like, this is actually really, really good because it allows the coordinator to get that extra time with the varsity guys who don't go both ways.
Yeah.
Because, we don't have a lot of guys who go both ways, but there are some. So I thought it was really neat to kind of hear that. What do you think?
Yeah, same. So we did the same thing at Kings Mountain. So like we go like varsity defense and then JV offense. If you don't play a position on defense in the varsity, we actually took them with the JV. So, but those practices would be like, it would be better for our quarterbacks because let's say we have a JV quarterback and 2 varsity quarterbacks. So now we get all 3 quarterbacks that can do routes on air. They can still throw to JV receivers. They can still throw perfect. They can still go through our basic schemes that we're going to do, and they just double the reps. So my quarterbacks in a day would basically double the reps sometimes. Like we would have like a varsity install, like a varsity practice with offense, and then we would split the day. And then once we go to varsity defense, my quarterbacks and just a couple of receivers that didn't play positional defense would actually come with the JV, and we'd do a lot of the same stuff again. It allowed me to get an extra individual period with my quarterbacks. My receivers were able to go get, catch a little bit more balls or whatever the case may be. And then they would still get called back over for a group period. So like if we go 7-on-7 or team or group run, the varsity players, especially the offensive line, because they don't play defensive line, they would get extra individual, and then they would go over in service, and then the JV team would be by themselves during those same periods to install what they needed to. It was a really good little system that we had in the fall.
And that's the thing. You gotta be able to think outside the box a little bit, especially when you're coaching 2 teams with the same staff. It's easy if you said, hey coach, make us a schedule. We got a JV team, varsity team. We have 2 different staffs. Well, shoot, dude, that's easy. You know what I mean?
That's easy. Yep.
But then, you start throwing in because you have to value your JV. You can't shun them. You
100%.
have to develop them. And I think it's important for that. But, when we do defense in the spring, I think, let's get into a little bit of how we structure practice, because I think that I want to hear your on some of these things. So when we first start defensive practice, I think it is super important, like you said, to teach the drills that you are going to carry over. So what does it take to be good at football on defense? Number 1 is tackling. I do not care what scheme you run. I don't care who the force player is. I don't care who the flat player is. I don't care who the B-gap bubble player is. If you cannot tackle, the scheme is irrelevant, because if your safety is the force player, well, if you don't understand the leverage of outside-in tackling and your alley player and linebackers don't understand the inside-out tackling leverage, it doesn't matter because the scheme's not going to work. So number 1's tackling. Number 2, I think you have to keep the ball in front of you. No explosive plays, because in high school especially, offenses are going to get impatient and they're going to screw up. The hardest thing is to have 11 dudes on offense line up and run a play to perfection and everybody do their job. Same way it is on defense, having 11 guys. So keep the ball in front of you. And 3 is turnovers. So the 3 not pre-practice, but the first periods we run at practice are going to correlate with tackling. They're going to correlate with turnovers, and they're going to correlate with alignment. Because if we can't align, and that brings me to kind of my saying, alignment, assignment, execution. Defense, if we can't align correctly to the formation that you present us, because we live in a world where, unfortunately, defense is reactionary. You create the space, and then our alignment changes based on the space that you create, which is why you see so many teams at the higher levels creating space and then shifting or changing that space right before the snap to try to misalign you. So the first thing we're going to do is be able to line up correctly. Second thing, we got to be able to tackle, and 3 turnovers. So every single day, our first periods will incorporate that in some way.
Yeah, and I like that too, because obviously turnovers are key on offense as well. I mean, the ball is the program. I love that statement. I didn't come up with that, but the ball is the program. And if you can take care of the ball, or you can take away the ball, you're going to be pretty successful. And so if you're going to pride yourself, like we try to pride ourselves on, taking care of the football. Yeah. I like to do that early in practice too. And I also like to do it like competitively when we can. Or a combined drill between offense and defensive personnel, whether it's, circle chase where we're, trying to secure a catch, tight turn, tug, tight turn. And then you guys are trying to rip and all that stuff. And so that I love that.
100%. And I think, to that point, I think even if you're two platoon, so even if you have straight offense practice, straight defense, I think, we did it at York, we've done it at Cannon, and I hope we do it at Marvin Ridge. Those things that we're working against each other, like the objectives of football. So y'all are trying to hold on to the ball, we're trying to get it. Like, let's come together to truly work it. Because the worst thing you can do is if we're working like 2-ball strip drill, is have a bunch of DBs trying to high and tight because they don't work it. You know what I mean? They don't work ball security. So let's actually get some receivers that we can work with that are going to give us a good look, that we can really try to punch and pull that ball out.
Yeah, and it's good, too, for those guys to work in. I mean, if they get an interception or if they're, ball security is important across the program. It's like tackling. It's like really everybody needs to learn how to tackle.
Yes.
And, heck, man, if we throw an interception, we don't need the guy to score. Let's, so if the quarterback needs to tackle in a safe way and give him some confidence tackling somebody, same thing with the kicker. Like, they need to go through that stuff. And I think it's great for the entire team to do it. And in some of those things, you can make it competitive. You can make it fun. You can simulate the game. And I think those drills we mentioned earlier, they simulate like game type situations to where you're gonna be in a chase position. You're gonna be chased in some capacity. Yep. And so I think those are huge. So I think the first part of practice, try to incorporate what you want to value the most. Ball security. For us, it's we want to be able to throw the ball and catch the ball when it's easy. We want to be able to incorporate that skill development and take care of the football too. So the next piece would be, how do you maximize time if you want to go pretty short in spring? And as you talk about that a little bit, what are the next phases of practice? How does it look?
Yeah, so once we kind of get I don't use the term EDD, everyday drills, but once we get what we believe in, and that's what we hang our hat on out the way, we always, if there's any kind of true install, we're going to have install period, because the kids need to see it multiple ways. So, and this kind of brings in, Pro Quick Draw, our sponsor. The first way that we teach kids is in the classroom. Well, the easiest way to do that, use a Pro Quick Draw. It's so easy to draw scout cards, to draw formations, and then Pro Quick Draw allows you to, you take your document that you made and it auto-populates it into any template, any form that you want. So I can make 8 separate scout cards that we want to see from the offensive perspective, and I can quickly use Pro Quick Draw to auto-populate it into a 1-page hand for the kids. And I think that's super important. So we will install in the classroom. So they're seeing it from a visual standpoint. They're watching it. And then if you have time for pre-practice, a walkthrough is not bad. Typically, we don't have a lot of time for that. So our alignment period is huge. So now that the kids have seen it on the screen, they've seen it on the handout, I want them to see it in live action of what they're going to see on the field. So we will do an install period / alignment period. So I want them to understand if we're seeing certain types of motions, they need to understand that. But, in the spring, we're not really probably going to see motions unless it's what our offense does as a base. So the biggest thing is alignment. Do we have an adjuster for trips? Do we spin? Do we sling? Do we slide with motion? Stuff of that sort. So, but then we kind of move into our indie. And the part about this is you have to meet with your staff, whether it's via Zoom or whether it's meetings prior to spring practice. But when we go to indie, I don't like to micromanage my coaches. They're all qualified. They all can do a really good job. I always label indie as must for group. So I don't micromanage necessarily what drills you're going to do in indie, but here's what we must know how to do when we hit our first group period. So for example, for linebackers, and I coach linebackers, I put must for group. We have to understand what our alignment is for 2x2 and 3x1. We have to understand how to set the front. We have to understand what fit family are we in, 1-back, H-back, 2-back, pro, and we have to understand what our coverage responsibility is. So we don't just go out there and, okay, line up in Indy, set the front, do this. We do drills, but I make sure they incorporate all of these things. They are a sequence to the drill. But I think that allows each position coach to really feel entitled. Like, I'm trusting you to handle your position fully, but understand when we get to half line pass or we get to 7-on-7 or inside run fits, we need to understand how to sit in the front, what our assignment is, and how to execute that assignment.
Yeah, I agree. I think similar to what you said, obviously we're going to be in the classroom. I like to use PQD, Pro Quick Draw, in a couple of different ways. One, I put all my installs on Huddle, or whatever software we're using. And the installs are basically what you would think of as like slides. But the cool thing is you can, like you said, you can auto-populate templates, and it makes it super fast. And then you just download the PDF and then put it into Huddle. They also have a feature now where you can automatically kind of transition the slides. That's really good. And then not only do I do that, but then the cool thing is when you go to auto-populate, you could do like a 1-up where it's got the whole play on one page, or you could do like an 8-up or a 4-up or a 2-up, and then kind of print out like either landscape or portrait type playbooks, and then I like to hand those out, and I like to do that by day. So I'll do like day 1 install handout to all the kids, and then after practice I'll hand out day 2. That way they can take it home, look at it. We'll go over it together when we go pre-practice, and then boom, we go. I even do it during the year. We'll do handouts, do like these like pre-game tests to make sure that the kids know what their responsibility is. So obviously Pro Quick Draw, obviously a sponsor of the of the podcast. They do great. We use those guys every single day. And so obviously that's a plug for them, but, and it really does help us. So once we get through that, our practice is very similar. We have our everyday stuff that we do. It's perfect drill. It used to be called noose drill. We call it perfect. We have pat and go. And then we do a ball security with the defense. And then we go into Indy. Indy's probably 15 minutes. And that Indy, I'm a little bit more structured in our system. I actually tell them what drills to do because it directly correlates with what our install is. So if we're doing like a gap day, then our offensive line, I may not say, all right, you got, sometimes I do. And I've got good feedback on it. It actually helps the coaches because we can actually talk about it, but we're going to be working also, like combo and then kick and then wrap,
I think a good point to that, cause like we're on separate ends. Like you do it one way, I do it one way. But I think a good thing to point out and mention is, what is your personnel of coaches?
Yep.
Do they?
Well, yeah. I think for us, we have really, really qualified coaches. Our offensive line guy's been doing it for a long time. And if he's listening, this guy's super old. No, he's really not. But he's a college level guy, and they've had a lot of success even before we came here in the run game. But I like to let him know, like, okay, because I think one thing that we have to consider is meeting time.
Yeah.
Like, are we a college staff where we're going to talk for an hour before practice or 2 hours before practice about every little thing? Or can we meet maybe a few times in the off season? And then obviously we meet during the season, but we've already named and talked about these drills. If I put the drill in, I trust you to do that drill fully. Yeah. And I may even send the running backs down with him because I trust him to do that, and the tight ends. And he's got all of that whole fit period in, but he knows what we're trying to fit. And so his Indy is going to be geared towards that install for that day. So if we're doing gap, that Indy is going to be, combo steps, near and far steps. It's going to be, pull kick, pull wrap. I mean, that's what he's going to be focusing on. If it's a zone day, it's obviously more zone footwork. In our case, it's kind of similar, so that helps. And so I think every position group is geared towards that. I'm like you. I give those guys autonomy, but for me, I just like to label that drill, and regardless really of their capacity as coaches. And then it gives them, and you got to be open to this too. Like, hey, coach, what about this particular drill that I really like to do? I like to use that flexibility for pre-practice. Yes. So some coaches may like to run bags. Do that during pre-practice. We always have a pre-practice thing. I may want to go with my quarterbacks and do echo drill, where we go through the progressions for the day. So we're taking the proper drop. We're communicating the protection, and then we're literally going through the progression. It's stick, glance back, stick, glance back, and that's just pre-practice stuff. And that I give full reign. My receiver coach may want to do catches with contact,
and that's that's a really good point to bring up. And this part of it is understanding what drills are used for in practice and what drills are used pre-practice and off season. I think that's a really good point. and this is just my opinion, but like I don't think you should have ladder drills in your indie. You know what I mean? Like that's off season.
I wouldn't use it for that. No, I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't use bags. I wouldn't use that kind of stuff for indie time.
Because now it's all application of
like I'm not throwing tennis balls to a receiver during indie.
No, and we
may get roasted for that, but like I'm just not going to do that.
Yeah, no, and you know what I think too. This is also interesting. Like I've watched like spring practices at the college level, and I've watched like some NFL practices, and I think what people need to realize too is like these
like
coaches have
they got to fill 8 hours.
Like these coaches are on the field for 2.5, 3 hours. You know, like they're doing a lot of these drills because they have so much time. So and this is a good thing for the spring ball blueprint. One thing that I love doing in the off season before spring is let's reverse engineer each position. So for example, you're an expert in wide receivers, one of the best wide receiver coaches I've ever been around. So what does it take? 3 things to be a great wide receiver. Okay. Like just spit the 3 things you think it takes to be a good wide receiver.
Yeah. I mean, skill wise, I mean, obviously being able to create separation. Yep. All right. And then to that would be to avoid collision. So I think those two are separate. I think creating separation is key. You could do that a couple different ways though. And I don't know how deep you want me to get into this, but like when I think about creating separation, you could do that with leverage or speed.
Yep.
So, and then obviously anybody's got to be able to avoid collision. I don't care how fast you are. If you can't avoid collision, whether that's press or if that's off, you're going to have a really, really hard time. And then obviously the third one is being able to catch the football and run after contact. So that would make elite receivers. So you have to train. So when you scaffold that, and maybe we need to do an episode on that. When I talk to my wide receiver coach, these are the goals that we have. Now that may be universal.
Yeah.
But everything that goes underneath that. So let's just talk about number one. All right, creating separation. What goes underneath that are the drills that we do to create separation. So for us,
on the same page.
That's going to be partner lean, fade, partner lean 90, right? Partner lean comeback. And then we're going to work partner lean shove by. And then we're going to work low arm bar, high arm bar, right? And then the other one's going to be to avoid collision, straight line pad level. Yep. And then your release series, you're going to go single stick, double stick, diamond release. And then you're building a toolbox for that kid, right? And then and then catching the ball. And the last one, you know, high level catching, you're going to work catching. You're not just going to be like throwing tennis balls, right? Sure. That's important, but you could do that in the weight room in between sets. You could do that anytime. What we're going to be worried about is catches with contact, right? We're going to be and the fourth thing really need to know is learn how to block, and that's a whole other thing. So that'll be the 4 categories. But anyway, you want to scaffold your practice and all your drill menu, and you need to hit every drill. So go ahead.
The point I was getting at is, you know, when you reverse engineer on what it takes to be great at your position, then you list all the drills that you know. So let's say we're not as specific in each one that you're talking. Let's just say drills in general. You know, you need to pick the drills that are working those things that you need the most. So for example, if, you know, you have route running as a drill, let's just say, and then you have straight line pad level as a drill. Well, straight line pad level or route running, you're running a route. That's it. That's all you're working. You're not working anything else. But straight line pad level, you're working your stance, you're working your start, you're working all parts
and you may and you may want to touch on this on the defensive side, but let's take route running. I'm not going to really spend my individual time running routes on air.
Doubt.
Because we have segments, I think we have that's routes on air, and then you can work that at 7-on-7. But you really want to run the route versus some kind of leverage.
Yeah.
So straight line pad level is a leverage drill that you're going to run particular routes based on the defender leverage. And so I think that's just something that I think I had to learn. You know,
and just to add in, man, straight line pad level is one of the best wide receiver drills that I've ever seen.
It's something we do every day.
It works everything. But yeah, so from on the defense side, you know, you kind of reverse engineer, you know, let's just look at a defensive lineman per se. So what does it take to be a great defensive lineman? Well, the first thing, obviously you got to line up. Second thing, when that ball moves, you better be moving. Like that's the first thing I would say your get off. 2 is hands, and 3 is finish. Get off, hands, and finish. Like I think it's that simple from a defensive line standpoint.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated for sure.
It doesn't at all. And some positions I do believe are a little more complicated than others.
More complex, I would say, or more.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, like a quarterback's probably going to have a greater set of tools. And again, this is probably like one of those,
Hey.
no, you can't defensive lineman. Like, okay, man, I get it. But there's certain things that each position it's going to be position specific, but the same process needs to happen. You need to, like you're saying, like reverse engineer it, figure out what you want the thing to look like, and then develop it through the drills that you do.
And
Don't
that's
just
where
have
you lean on your and that's where you lean on your coordinator. Like
100%.
Like I think that's a big thing is let me set a meeting up with my coordinator. Hey, what are you looking for in this position? Because I truly think that if you're a coach, you can coach any position, and the way you do that is one, I need to understand what scheme and the coordinator I'm working for, what they want out of this position.
And the coordinator needs to step up and have that meeting.
Yes, 100%.
I think that's on the coordinator to direct that if the head coach is allowing him to do that, right? Like for me, I need to set the meeting with the offensive line coach and say, this is what we do in our offense. So they need to be able to pull, they need to be able to combo, they need to be able to kick, right? Like pass pro, what does pass pro look like? And sometimes I like to do this too. Maybe he's really good at teaching vertical set. Maybe he's really good at teaching kick slide. Okay. I'm fine with whatever he wants to go with. He's got, you don't think skip pull versus, just a rip pull, right? But you're wrapping, right? Whatever, man. Like I think at that point, if he's a qualified guy, you teach it how it needs to be taught.
Sure.
I'm even down to like, okay, I have a pretty big opinion on near and far steps. I love it, but I'm not to the point where I'm not coaching that position. If the combo gets done, the combo gets done by just 2 near steps, whatever.
As long as the near step guy's shoulders don't turn.
I'm not going to, like you're talking about, I'm not going to micromanage that position group.
Yes.
As long as these guys are working the details that make our offense go.
100%. Yep. And so I think we'll kind of move into the next part of practice. I like where we're going with this, but then we kind of move into group and then team competition period. So I think group, if you ask me what my favorite part of practice is, it's group. Like that. That's what I would say. I think team and competition's fun, but I really love group because it is the controlled setting of multiple positions working together. And, you
can still simulate the game.
Sure. Yep.
Like, it's the best part of team.
Yes. And I mean, also, and I'm going to create this little, argument, but I'm also on the defensive side. So if it's inside run, we know you're running it. If it's 7-on-7, we know
you guys are also like, hey man, let's go like 11-on-7 or some crap. Like,
oh no, I can't stand that. No, it's funny.
It's like 9. It's 9-on-11. That's what it is. It's like you always
funny.
Have like 2 extra in the fit.
We set up. We went on our summer trip this past season. Went down there and scrimmaged them, and we were only working 1 back runs and inside run. Because we were big air raid, sling it around. So we go 1 back run, and we're on offense. And I go with the OL DL just because I'm like, we're on offense 7-on-7. I don't want to be down there. I'm a defensive guy. So I go to inside run, and they're an odd team. They're 3-3 stack. They have 2 overhang guys and 2 safeties behind them. And I was like, hang on, 3, 6, 8, 10. I said, that's 10 guys. So, our kids get frustrated because like we're just getting obliterated, like just getting annihilated. And so I take the backup lineman and line them up in the 2x2 formation. And then the defense just lines up in completely something different. And I was like, oh, that's all I need to know. So we just started running formations and inside running.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, man, it's, great.
I had something similar, man. Like we're at Cannon. I'm not going to name the school, but we're doing a 7-on-7. And nah, dude, they're odd. So you know what they are. They're 8-on-7, right? And they're not blitzing. Usually you see like an odd team. They'll like bring a guy and like take a knee. Nah, man, we're dropping 8, son. Like just and like
dropping 8
like,
and 7
like they're like, what are we doing, man? You want me to like run like quarterback draw here or what?
Yeah.
Like and then the timer's like 3 seconds. Like, okay, you're getting home with 3 guys, but that's just me being petty. But you know what? Sometimes those things happen, and sometimes you get a little pissy about it, but ultimately, man, like it creates more challenges for you. And if the team's going to come out there and play a bunch of 2-man, don't get frustrated, especially if it's not some like 7-on-7 championship that guys will throw around, whatever. That's a whole nother thing. But that's a good way to work against 2-man, especially if you're not going to have your ego hurt by if you don't complete 70% of the passes and with that.
Sure.
So.
And that kind of brings us in, what do I advise? And is in spring and summer, I would probably run very similar to what you're going to run in the season.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. We went to Gaffney when I was at Legion for a 7-on-7, and I won't name the team, but we were playing a team. They were yellow, and they played 2-man the entire time. And then,
do you think they play that in the season?
No, we asked them. I said, "Hey, coach, y'all play a lot of 2-man in a season?" "Nah, man, we blitz a lot." I said, I got you. I said, I was just
10-4,
wondering.
boss.
I said,
10-4.
sounds good, but
you know, each coach has their own thing. Maybe he wanted to work a bunch of 2-man. You know,
yeah,
maybe he wanted to work
and that's the thing. You never know what someone is plan is. You know, maybe it is, hey man, I want to experiment with some 2-man stuff, and you know,
you know, early back in the, you want to win all of them, and it's important for your team to win, but you just don't know what you're going to get. I like doing the thing where you invite the schools to your school, or you go to a school and you can kind of work with the other coach. And hey man, what do you guys
let me tell you, the most efficient spring/summer 7-on-7 I've ever seen is in Oklahoma. I went out with Spencer, or to hang out with Spencer a year or two ago, and there are like 6 teams there. And what happens is, all right, let's say the 3 teams are Kings Mountain, Cannon, and Marvin Ridge. Kings Mountain is going to be on defense for 16 plays nonstop. Cannon and Marvin Ridge are going to be an offensive huddle, and Cannon's going to run a play, come back, and then Marvin Ridge is up running a play. And it is the most efficient thing, but I think it is the most beneficial thing for both sides of the ball, because on defense, you're seeing 2 completely different offensive systems, you know? And then from an offensive standpoint, you are going to go against multiple teams, and it simulates a true live, I ran a play, I'm going to the huddle. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it was very efficient.
That's cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I like to check that out. All right, so talking about team and talking about group, you know, what are your thoughts on, like, I guess I'll give my thoughts and see what you say, but like contact and no contact in the spring. The number one thing I want to get out of the spring is healthy.
100%.
You know, I'm not trying to develop a bunch of toughness in the spring, especially if you can do contact. In South Carolina, we could do full tilt contact. I'm not doing Oklahoma. I'm not doing full going to the ground contact. I think, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I just don't want to have a guy get rolled up and it puts him back 8 weeks. He can't lift for 8 weeks. You know, he's not in shape when the season comes. I want to get out of spring healthy. I think most people probably agree with that, but I do like to thud at times, but I don't want anybody to get rolled up. I don't want the offensive lineman to get rolled up or something like that. But that's why I think group is better in the spring, because you can control a lot of that. You know, you can do a lot of 7-on-7. You want to do a little bit of team pass, you can, but yeah, you're probably not going to be blitzing a whole lot, so you're not putting a lot of guys in a ton of conflict. It's pretty controlled. And then you got to teach your team how to tag off if you're going to tag off. I think that's 100%. Hard. So I just like to thud. Just thud. It create, you know, you're still got to get in a good position. Yeah. Tagging off is a bit weird in high school. I just think it's not as effective.
One thing I think too is you can go live without going full tilt. And kind of what I mean by that is, from a defensive standpoint and even an offensive standpoint, you got to get a stimulus. You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
you got to push guys. You got to block them. I just don't want guys like flat back and
100%
rolling guys up.
So I think the contact portion of the tackle is what we're talking mostly about.
Correct.
I think that you alternate thud and tag, because we will never go to the ground in spring. You know, even in the spring game, I think I would keep it controlled if you do a traditional spring game, because the risk is not worth the reward. You know,
and I think not that early. No,
and I think you could arguably say, especially tackling wise, that 60 to 70% of the tackle is tracking the tackle. You know what I'm saying? Yep. And you have the contact portion, fitting the tackle, and then you have the finish portion. And finish is going to be eliminated from team competition, but that doesn't mean you can't work the finish at some other point in practice. You know,
right?
Maybe in your tackle circuit, you are working the finish. You know, you are running through the defender and landing on a pad. You know, it's not as hard on the body, but you're still getting this body-to-body contact and landing on a surface. And I think that's a big thing.
It goes back to our goals of like, all right, skill development's a goal. I didn't think that one of our goals was like all-out toughness and like being able to battle through injuries. We want kids to come back out the next day, refresh, skill develop. Like, it's going to be, you know, you don't want to turn into I don't want to turn into like a big bloodbath. Now, the kids are going to want to hit, and I think at the place that I'm at, we did we did Circle Chase for the first time, the very first spring practice, and these dudes. I mean, I'm not gonna say it. I mean, we had to like stop them, and we have a thud period, or a bump period in North Carolina that you can bump, and they were bumping. I mean, it was like bumping, and
what's like
we had to like stop it. You know, but that's a good problem to have. Like you want to.
It's just what you're gonna say. When you have a guard dog, you want to be able to chime them back. You don't want to have to.
But you want to give them the stimulus, and I think the stimulus has got to be controlled. But they got to know, like, look, we are not breaking the rules for one, especially if you're in a place that you can't do that. You never want to break the rules. It's not worth it. And two, we want to get out of here healthy. Let's get to summer, and then and go for it. So, I think that kind of takes care of practice structure.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit before we get into our quick fire discussion. Let's talk a little bit about how to develop and identify leaders, just for a bit, because I think this is a crucial part. We talked a little bit about establishing culture and your behaviors and your rules and your core values in spring. Let's talk about identifying leaders. I think that's a huge component in any successful team, is to identify leaders early.
Yes.
And this is a time where you can really see guys step up, especially if they're like a returning starter that was an underclassman or somebody like that. But talk a little bit about how you identify leaders and what kind of stands out to you and how you kind of approach that.
So the first thing that I do, we have a one-on-one meeting, or the head coach at the time, had a one-on-one meeting with every player at the end of football season. Typically took place right before Thanksgiving break or right after Thanksgiving break, but we have a one-on-one, and that's even a chance for the seniors who are graduating, to have an exit meeting. But when I meet with the current 10th, 9th, and 11th graders, the last question in the one-on-one is, I say, it's one thing for me as a coach to think who I believe the leaders are on the team, but it's another thing for you and who you think the leaders are. So what I want you to do is I want you to think, now that the seniors are graduated, they're no longer a part of the program, who do you see as a leader on our team? And give me 3 to 5 names.
Yes.
And this past season, I'll say their names because they're outstanding young men, but we had 3 upperclassmen captains, and out of 37 one-on-one meetings, each of these 3 guys had at least 31 kids in the one-on-one meeting say they saw them as a leader. Wow. And I think, and it was Grant Springate, Mason Mearswa, and Henry Anthony. And I think that speaks volumes, because I don't think it's a popularity contest when you have that many people say that. I think it's kids really confiding and saying, listen, when these guys speak, I listen. When they go, I go. And that gives me a really good idea of who the upperclassmen captains should be. And then also, I did an earn it captain. We did 2 earn it captains. So as soon as the offseason started in December, all the way up until May, what 2 guys earned it the most?
Yeah.
Like, who was there, their energy. When they weren't there, we noticed they weren't there. So I think that's a way.
Yeah, I think it's definitely school dependent. I think just different, areas and communities. It can be different. I think definitely our experience at Cannon was very similar. I've been at places where we've asked the coaches to identify leaders in their position groups because they see them interact.
Yes.
Because a lot of times if you're at a place where, the character is not probably where it needs to be, what type of input do you want from guys that may not have that maturity yet to identify leaders in their own team? Like, they may have a different set of values than the coaches do, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So as a coach, you want to make sure that your values and your core values for your program, your brand, is extended through the team captains to the players, and not necessarily the other way around. So if they pick guys that don't necessarily align with your values, I do like having their input, but I don't always listen to them, especially if it goes in, if it contradicts our core values. So I do like using position captains. I think that for a couple of reasons. They don't have to be leaders of the entire team. They have to be leaders of their position. So if they're a quieter person, they may lead better in that role because they can have these like one-on-one communication things with their position group. And those leaders of the position groups will ultimately emerge as your overall team captain. So like, it could be a top dog running back that's over a small group, but then he's also like the entire team captain. It kind of emerges And I think you can use the spring to do that. One, because you see how they interact in the weight room. You can see how they interact, breaking them down. Who's the guy that they're listening to? Who are the guys that this guy doesn't really have it? And then who can you identify as, hey, look, man, we need you to step up. Like we need you to be more vocal, because ultimately, if you're going to be a captain, you have to have communication skills. You have to see who can communicate well, or you have to teach them to do that. Then once you identify those guys, I think then you go in. I really like to build into them those leadership qualities. So, I think holding teammates accountable is a big thing.
I think that's a big part, what you just said. I think a big part is once you find out who your captains are, you have to do your part as a leader and prepare them to be captains and leaders. Because I think a lot of times people just assign captains because that's what sports does. Like, teams have to have captains, but I think it's super important to provide a captain's council, a leadership council, where you teach them how to lead. You teach them through tough situations and tough conversations. But the biggest thing I like within that, teaching them how to lead, is allowing them to lead and say, listen, this is your team, so if there's something going on you don't like, let's go ahead and fix it. Like, you have the autonomy to fix it. Now, if it's a situation where I need to be involved, and we should do it, but we need that transparency between our captains group. What's going on? Like, let's fix this.
Yeah. The number one thing when we established the captain's council at Cannon, and I think you did something similar, is once you have identified your leaders and your captains, you train them. You specifically, it's not character, but I think there's a difference between leadership training and character building. Your entire team goes through character building to teach your core values, but then your captains probably need something a little bit different. They need a little bit of extra on them to equip them to lead. And so the captain's council gives them the platform. And so, but really what I like the captain's council is, and that's, we met, weekly during the season, but we established it in the spring on through the summer, is they're your eyes and ears of your program. So you can check in with hey man, how's your position group doing? Right? Well, hey man, so-and-so he's kind of upset because he didn't have any offers, or he's upset because of playing time. I'm thinking, okay, what do you think is going to be able to get to him? Have you tried to talk to him yet? What intervention have you done to try to steer him back to our core values and our team mission? And say, well, I haven't done anything. Well, then, man, great opportunity for you, man. Let's talk about the way that you can approach him based on his personality and the relationship that you have. And it makes them have a relationship with that kid. And that's how you get the locker room led program. And
that's
then
good.
If it's above you, then you say, okay, I'm going to talk to the kid. And then I could talk to the parent. But the kid feels like he's supported by his peers. He's supported by his coaches. And then ultimately you get the family in and hopefully steer him back in the right direction. Obviously that's like a perfect scenario, but that's how you would see that at work. Then they can also help you out with, hey man, we want to wear these uniforms. We like this on social media. You can use them for a lot of different things, and it gives them that autonomy.
That
like
that eyes and ears piece is huge. I like that a lot. I never thought about it like that. The eyes and ears. Yep, I like that saying. But yeah, man, I think that's a great point to kind of move on, into our quick fire discussion.
I can't wait to have those two conversations about how to package everything.
These next episodes are going to be great.
We're going to talk
and I think a good thing to talk about, is we're specifically talking about spring practice right now, but I think everything that we're hitting on and talking about can be applied for every sport,
for
spring, winter, or fall, because we all work off of a 12-month calendar, and you just have to adjust based on your fall, spring, or winter athlete. And you may not have a preseason like spring practice like football does, but I think that, you can put your head together and lean on your coaches and come up with your own system that fits that sport. But yeah, man, I think the captains of each position group, that might be something I have to adapt and put down, because that's a really beneficial one, it sounds like.
For sure. And, the other goal we talked about was team chemistry and culture building. We talked a bit about like character specific things, and then you could even do the leadership training with your captains during that. And,
what's funny, I'm stepping into the director role. I want to do that for all teams from that leadership standpoint. So, I'm going to tell head coaches that I work with, listen, we're going to have a captain's council led by me, and I want to be able to teach every captain of every sport team in our school how to be a leader, how to lead your team,
and how it aligns with the athletic department. And what and ultimately the school values. Absolutely. I think those are crucial.
And because your point is, when we do the captain's council on our team, they're the eyes and ears of the program.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's the eyes and ears of each team in our athletic program. It's major.
I think it's good. That's great. So that's a great opportunity. So now, my favorite part of each one of these episodes is this quick fire discussion. So I'm going to ask you the first one. So what's the number one, this is probably softball, what's the number one priority for spring football practice?
Number one priority.
And just you could take it from a couple different perspectives if you want.
Sure. Yeah, I think number one priority is evaluating personnel, 100%. I think let's see who we got, what they're able to do. You can find a scheme that fits them best, that gives you the best chance to compete later down the road.
Agreed. I think if that's not number one, the next closest one is establishing the culture, the brand, how you're, especially if you're new. I think if you're a first-year coordinator at that school or a first-year coach, what you got to implement what you want your program to be. And obviously that incorporates evaluating talent, putting the guys in the right spot. But yeah, I think if that's not number one, the next one for me would be definitely implementing your culture. That's the first time that you're all together. So you got one chance to really, it's this first impression, right? What kind of coaches are you going to have? Like, or what kind of coach you're going to be?
No, I really agree. All right. Second one. What do you think is a common mistake that's made in the spring?
Yeah, I think that I can just go personally on this one. I've gone like too far with like the intensity, like making it like it's
absolutely getting after
because
it.
I got like one speed, and sometimes I think it's important to dial back, and try to, especially early on. I think this year being year 3, man, I could probably I'm in the weight room with them every day. Like they know who I am. But man, I came in freaking like hair on fire.
Yeah.
Like, day one, like I was on them. And it probably fired some kids up like, okay, let's go. But it probably pushed some kids away too. Yep. And so I think one of my mistakes that I've made is like that spring ball. Like, let's just back off a touch, Jamie. Yeah. Just back off a touch.
Spring, brother. We ain't playing no games.
But I was excited, man. I was like, man, we're gonna go. So I think that's a mistake that I've made in the past.
Well, I think I've made the same mistake just in a different realm, and it's doing too much, but it's from a scheme standpoint. So, first year at Cannon, when installing the defense in the spring, and spring and private school ball really isn't spring. It's the last 2 weeks of May. Most people don't
early
do it,
summer,
or most people do helmets only. So it's really early summer. And, I had this nice, fancy, good looking install, that was like 11 columns long with, what personnel and
Flex
formation family.
Bronco Buck 64 bracket.
7 mix, 5 cut dog, like all of the things. And after day one, I said, yep, I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to erase day 2 through whatever. And we're going to stick with day 1 for about 2 or 3 days.
We didn't set you up better, buddy. Sorry.
Oh, man.
Sorry, guys didn't know.
No, man, it's all good. I just realized, just doing too much, like understand that what's the goal of spring, and really focusing on your base stuff and get good at something. Because let me tell you something, because you can debate. Do you need to be odd and even front? Do you need to have middle of the field open and middle of the field closed? And to a degree, I agree. I think you need to be able to do it all. But to another standpoint, if we're not really good at any of it, it doesn't matter.
Well, it's going back. It's going back to like, okay, if you don't know yet, you might as well try to do both early and then pair back.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry to cut you off. All right, my next one, mine's for you, right? Yep. All right. Okay, so this is a good one. All right, so should spring ball be more about skill development, like the fundamentals, or should you focus on more scheme install? So like fundamentals versus scheme, and then so which one is more? Like,
so I'll be honest.
We probably already know. We've been talking about it.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think it's kind of like culture and scheme. Like you need both. Like I don't think you can just go out there and work on.
But if
how
you
to
had
run
to
a
put
route.
one, well, you got to put a priority on. I'm not letting you get off the hook with that.
If I had to put a priority on one, I'm going to be honest with you. We're probably going to work on scheme first. Because I think
I tend to agree with that. Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of reasons why. I think from a schematic standpoint, you don't work scheme as much in the offseason as you do fundamentals and skill development. For example, in strength and conditioning, certain positions or working things that are very similar to fundamentals of Indy and the skills. Scheme is not. So I would say it's more about getting our base scheme in, and then we have summer to really work the fundamentals.
I agree. I think that is huge. Like you could work fundamentals throughout, non-dead period times before spring football if you have that luxury. Spring football, you got to get your stuff in, get ready for 7-on-7, and then try to refine the skills in order to execute it better. But I think if you go out there for 12 days and you're doing just Indy periods, there's some benefit to that, but I think you put yourself behind if you wait till the summer to install, because I think you need that stuff going into 7-on-7 and your scrimmages. You want to just be able to continue to repeat those things and then just refine the skill, and then you start executing those things better. And if you put too much in, that's okay, because you can always pare back.
Well, I think,
in my opinion,
if you look at it from a defense standpoint, so let's say that we use something called a scooch technique at safety. Well, if all we do is work the scooch technique, we don't have to apply the scooch technique. But if we install the scheme, what's your alignment? What's your eye control? How do you react if he does this or this? Then, say we haven't worked the fundamental of scooch technique. Well, then the kid's going to understand, why is it hard to cover these certain routes? Well, it's because of technique. So now we're going to focus on using the technique to help the scheme that we put.
Correct. It's the same as a drop with the quarterback. So, like, I'm not going to teach him a drop. Like when I'm installing a passing concept, like we marry our drop to our concept. So if I'm teaching a 2-step drop on stick, well, I'm not just going to say, hey, throw stick, because we're installing the scheme. It's like I'm teaching you the drop that's timed up. Now, if the drop's not perfect, obviously we'll coach that up on the fly, but we got time to kind of work that in individual period during spring. But my emphasis, I'm not going to just say, we're going to do every single drop. We're going to do a 2-step, a 3-step, a punch 3, a quick 3, right? Play fake, a pop drop. We're not going to teach all those before we teach scheme. We're going to do it at the same time, and then you kind of refine those through. So again, that's kind of a loaded question, but may have time for one more.
Yeah, last one. All right, I got it. I know which one I want to ask.
Oh no.
All right, what's the toughest position to evaluate in the spring?
Oh, 100%. No, well, here it is. All right, if you only got one of them, it ain't that hard.
Yeah.
Well,
true.
it's like
if you got 3 guys that ain't no good, it still ain't no.
Yeah,
it ain't
exactly.
hard.
It's like if you got one guy, he's a quarterback. Like, but the last 2 years it's really been. I think we at York we had a quarterback situation between the two. Very similar guys though, but one could play receiver, which helped our offense, and he was okay with that. And he didn't really want to be the quarterback.
Came in key region games against some really good teams.
So let me tell this story real quick. So this one. So we're at Nation Ford. We're at York, but we're down there. I think it's 41 seconds left in the game. We have our quarterback in that had to come in. He played like JV receiver the year before. Then he had to play varsity quarterback. Great kid, super tough as nails, but he's 5'9", 165-pound kid that can't. He's not the greatest runner, not the greatest thrower, but just tough as nails. Just a good old York boy. Like love this kid. And so he comes in. We've been okay that year. Weren't super explosive. We get a transfer in the same year, but he's a transfer. He hadn't earned the job. Probably a little more talented, a little better arm, maybe a little better runner. And anyway, we're at NAFO, 41 seconds left. We have a 3rd down play call. It's kind of like a little rollout. He almost throws a pick 6. This is the York boy here. And so the pick 6 almost happens. The kid drops it. We got a 4th down play. Okay, we call Missouri Z, which is basically just like vertical switch scissors. And but the funny part is we call the play, as a timeout. So we're on the sideline, and the offense coordinator at the time, Knox, So it calls the play. We're like, yeah, we got this. We're going. And then the kid says, Coach, and I'm going to do the accent.
Please.
Coach, I can't make that throw. So, dude, my jaw dropped. I'm like, what? And then the transfer kid, he's kind of this goofy guy. He kind of pops up in the back, goes, I'll do it. So we throw him in there on 4th down. The kid takes a 3-step drop, rips one, and we score. And I'm so excited. I'm in the back of the end zone. I'm like the signaler. I'm not even calling
about
plays.
60% of the team and coaching staff is in the end zone.
There's like 35 seconds left in the game, and Coach Carroll's yelling at everybody, and
so we kind of just make a loop.
Yeah, we make a loop all the way back around. But that's an example of just I don't know how we got on that, but how to evaluate a position. It can be hard. Here at Kings Mountain, we've had 2 years in a row that we had 3 quarterbacks my first year that were all getting reps in the summer and in scrimmages. It makes it hard. It does. And all 3 of those guys are good kids. They work really hard, but if you guys split 3 reps, then neither one of them are really probably going to emerge, especially if they're all very similar. Then last year, like we already talked about, we had a runner and a pocket guy, and then one ended up emerging and playing well enough where the other kid couldn't work his way back in, and that kid's a really good player. And you know, so it can be very hard for a quarterback. I think it's probably the hardest when you have 2 similar kids. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, from the defensive side, it's going to be linebacker, no doubt. Inside linebacker. Yeah. It is so tough. You have to understand every aspect of the defense as soon as you step on the field, which is why I have the most meetings with those guys. They have to understand from the time the call's in, the passing strength, what is the key to setting the front versus that specific formation or personnel. And then they have to understand, okay, what's my alignment? What's my primary gap, my secondary gap? What are my keys? What are my reads? What is my pass coverage drop? Who am I relating to? It is a lot. At the end of the day, they still got to play with screws loose and go get the football. So I think it's a really tough position, but I think if you package it well, it takes a lot off their plate. But
yeah, and I think just to all this, it's like spring ball, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, you could have the most pocket passer, super slick quarterback, and then when the bullets start flying, it doesn't work out. In the fall, same thing I'm sure with like linebackers and such, like, oh, this guy fits it up great, like great read, but then when it comes down to it, they can't make a tackle or shed a block or do the things that's necessary to be a football player when football happens, because this ain't really football if you're not going to do some full contact. So
sure.
Yeah, man, great conversation today. Again, just want to shout out Pro Quick Draw for the sponsorship and our partnership with them. And if you guys are interested in using that platform it's not necessarily a playbook platform, although you can use it as that. It's way more than that. It goes beyond where you can, create templates, and it's good for communication with players and coaches, especially this time of year. We do have an affiliate link. You can find that in discussion notes, and it's a free trial. So if you want to try it out, you guys can actually reach out to us if you have questions. They have great customer service. So if you want to give them a try, it's free to you. So Dustin, what you got, bud?
Yeah, Pro Quick Draw has saved me so much time as a coach, and it's something I truly, genuinely believe in. And it's to the point where whatever staff I'm on, whether I'm an assistant coach or head coach, if we don't have the funds for it, I'm going to pay for it out of my pocket because it's inexpensive, and it is just so valuable. I think that
I have 2 accounts with them. Yeah, and
I think
personally,
this past season, it saved my life. And not to mention the new play editor tool that they have makes it just as easy to use through the PowerPoint. It makes it so easy to use with the play editor tool because you can create scout cards in the blink of a minute. And now you can auto-populate it, put it in your template, auto-populate it to a handout or a PowerPoint or an install. Yep. And then also they have the ability to have Huddle Link where you can bring plays, videos in that link right with the scout card that you just made. It's non-ending, just the ability and capabilities it has.
Well, good deal, man. Well, great discussion today, man. I'm excited about spring football, and we got a couple other episodes kind of geared around packaging and how we're going to structure our offense and defense, and how we use personnel. So we hope to see you in the next one.
Thanks for tuning into the Coach Speak podcast. If you're interested in being a guest speaker on the show, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at coachspeakpodcast1@gmail.com. And if you have a question for our Q&A segment, don't forget to submit it through the form in the episode description. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.